So, well, it's very nice to see everyone here today. Thank you for coming. I think we'll have an interesting afternoon talking with Cary. The One Book, One Community Read has been going on now, what, Mary, 11, 12 years, huh? Something like that. And so at each year we find something we find of interest and we're able to discuss it. And this year I think we'll equally find the topic interesting and informative. Gunflint Falling, Blow Down in the Border Waters, sheds light on the 1999 storm in the Boundary Water canoe area. While revisiting the history of this storm, we readers are reminded of Mother Nature's sheer and unapologetic force. Yet readers can take hope after reading about the perseverance and the courage of the people amidst this natural disaster. The damage from this historic storm laid the timber that would blaze in the Ham Lake fire in 2007, thus reshaping the region's forest. You can read about this in Gary's book. I want to keep calling him Gary rather than Cary. The book, Gunflint Burning. And it was published in 2018. I don't know, do we have a copy of that back there? No. Oh, yeah, you got it on back order. So, but you can still get the face of the book from Linda. There are many collaborators that pull together such a thing like this. And one is the behind the scenes of the One Book, One Community book read that meets pretty much 8 or 9 times to kind of find a book, look how to present it, and so forth. We also have the Hutchinson Connect Committee, which is responsible for getting publicity out, putting the food together. Hutchinson Health, which does a lot of things with publicity and so forth. The Hutchinson Station, our new newspaper in town, and the Public Library, of course, from Hutchinson. We also want to give thanks to the Hutchinson Center for the Arts and the McLeod County Museum for making copies of the book available for purchase. We'd also like to extend a sincere thanks to the cable television people for putting this on the air, and it can be reviewed later on. The One Book, One Community project is made possible in thanks for funding from the Friends of the Hutchinson Public Library and Trivent. Funding for today's author event is made possible through a grant from the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Our speaker today, Cary, has written a total of 4 nonfiction books which share true stories of survival and courage in the Boundary Waters canoe area. He's also written 4 books in the fictional vein Sam Rivers Mystery Series. He's a recipient of the Minnesota Book Award and the Midwest Book Award. So with that, Cary, take it away, and we're looking forward.
Thank you. And a special call out to one of your newest stores in Hutch, Bookkeeper. We really appreciate it. They graciously agreed to handle the sales. If any of you want some of my other books, they're here. And if they've got on back order the book I'm going to spend most of the time talking about today, Gunflint Falling, Blow Down in the Boundary Waters. They will have that on sale too, and I'll stay after to sign any books that you guys are interested in purchasing. Just one thing about our independent booksellers in Minnesota, I use that term loosely, we writers in Minnesota are really blessed to have excellent independent booksellers throughout the state. I've visited many of them. I love them. They're great sources for communities to find and purchase and have books, and they often support book clubs and that kind of thing. So please patronize the Bookkeepers, who I think have been in business just a little over a month. So stop by if you get a chance. I'm going to spend most of my time, probably 30, 35 minutes talking about this, and then we'll open it up for questions, this book here. Of course, I'll have to talk a little bit about my other books so you know what they are. But as a more tangible way of saying thanks to everybody who came out today, thank you, I'm going to give away a free copy of Gunflint Burning, Fire in the Boundary Waters. This came out about 5 years ago. It was my third nonfiction book. It's about the Ham Lake fire of 2007, if any of you remember that event. But I have to say, I'm not going to give it away to just anyone. What I do is at the end, I have a little contest. I asked 3 questions, true, false, yes, no, and I give you the answer to those questions in the course of my remarks. So you have to pay attention. Now, to be in the running to win a free book, you have to get the answer to all 3 questions correct. And I'll give you sort of hints along the way as to what factoids I might share with you are really important ones to remember. And you know, I grade on a curve, so almost everyone will be included in the book giveaway. Of course, I can't give a copy of a book to everyone, so I have a way of deciding who wins a tie. Has anybody been to any of my other book giveaway events? Oh, do you remember how I...
Worry about it.
Do you remember how I determined who wins a tie?
I know.
Okay. You're disqualified.
I wasn't
No.
planning to listen.
No, I'm going to have to ad-lib and do a different thing. Anyway, thanks a lot for coming today. And that's sort of what we're going to talk about. David, you want to go ahead? As he mentioned before, I write books about wild places. All of my books are set in Minnesota. I have 4 nonfiction books out there. The first 3 were Lost in the Wild, about true survival stories. 2 true survival stories that happen in the Boundary Waters. Opening Goliath is the story of the discovery, exploration, and politics surrounding a wild cave in southeastern Minnesota. Gunflint Burning is about the Ham Lake fire of 2007. And then I have a character I write about by the name of Sam Rivers, who's a special agent for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. He gets involved in crimes because he manages the endangered species list. That's part of his beat. But also he knows a lot about the flora and fauna in the outdoors. And so if there's a crime that has anything to do with a species or an endangered species, Sam gets involved. So in Wolf Kill, you'll learn something about wolf biology. In Cougar Claw, it's a story of the alleged predation of a savage Minnesota businessman by a mountain lion. That sounds a little far-fetched, but it has actually happened. Mountain lions, on extremely rare occasions, will stalk and predate people. Killing Monarchs is about a drug cartel in Mexico that's using shipments of monarch chrysalises to school children in the upper Midwest to smuggle in drugs. Go ahead, David. Today, I'll spend most of my time talking about Gunflint Falling. Just a show of hands, this is a story about the epic windstorm that happened in the Boundary Waters on July 4th, 1999. How many people remember that storm? Okay, yeah, quite a few. Was anybody in the Boundary Waters that day? You were. You were? You're awfully young. You must have been very young. Wow. In the Q&A, I'd love to hear your story if you remember details about it. Yeah, how old were you?
Oh, I don't know. I have to think about it, but I was pretty young. My dad had to cut his way in to get to me. He had a phone truck, so he had a big bucket truck, and he was able to get trees down.
Yeah. Wow. I want to hear about that. And that doesn't surprise me because typically in a crowd this size, there's usually somebody who was in the Boundary Waters that day and remembers the storm or has a relative who was impacted by it. My fourth Sam Rivers mystery was Dead Catch. It's about walleye poachers on Lake Vermilion, and if you're going to poach walleye, you're probably a murderer, and that's how Sam Rivers and that's how Sam Rivers gets involved in that one. Go ahead, David. My ninth book, my fifth Sam Rivers mystery is called Rattlesnake Bluff. It'll be out June 10th this year. How many people here know we have rattlesnakes in Minnesota? Lots. I'm always surprised by this because I didn't realize this until a few years ago, but we have timber rattlesnakes in the southeast. 20 years ago, we used to have another species of rattlesnake called the eastern Massasauga rattlesnake. And this book opens on a development site in outside of a fictitious town east of Rochester, Minnesota, in Minnesota's bluff country, called Owens Gap. And they find, and this workman kills, an eastern Massasauga rattlesnake. Well, of course, because it's very unusual and they're rare and endangered, Sam Rivers has to get involved. They go down, and within 2 or 3 days, he uncovers the bodies of 2 children from a mystery that happened 25 years earlier, and then bodies start piling up, and of course, Sam Rivers and his wolf dog, he has a wolf dog, Gray, a hybrid, they save the day. Great book, I've heard. Now, I would be remiss, you write a book like Gunflint Falling, and I would be remiss if I didn't thank all the people I spoke with and that shared their stories. I spoke with more than 100 people. I call out 60 in the acknowledgments. Without their generosity in sharing their stories and helping me out, this book, Gunflint Falling, would not have been possible. I owe them a huge debt of gratitude. Go ahead, David. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but this windstorm, most people think about it, oh, well, it really hit this area right in here. This is the boundary waters. Those black crosses are signs of the most intense damage. But you can see here the storm started early on the morning of July 4th, just west of Fargo, and then blew across there. Now, a lot of people, as I mentioned, don't realize the storm was actually 6,000 miles long and blew for about 3 days. This part started in the morning. By around noon, it hit this area and felled in the boundary waters 48 million trees. That might be an important statistic to remember. 48 million trees, and amazingly, no one died. Now that day, the Forest Service, by their best guess estimates, were that the boundary waters had between 4,000 and 10,000 campers in it. Of those 48 million trees that fell, many of them were huge old growth trees, and the fact that no one died is just amazing. But people did die as the storm continued blowing east-northeast. The storm did kill people in Canada from downed power lines and trees. By the 5th, it blew through Maine and did damage. It went out into the Atlantic. It went due south. It turned in at Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, blew through the Mississippi Delta, and finally burned itself out about 3 days later in the Gulf of Mexico. It was a huge storm. Now, one other thing that you should remember is that this storm is called a derecho. Derecho is Spanish for straight line winds. You don't have to remember all this. But a derecho is a straight line wind that blows at a velocity of approximately 80 miles per hour or more for at least 250 miles. This one clearly qualified. What is unusual is that it's seldom derechos that go for at least 250 miles seldom happen this far north in the boundary waters. It's very uncommon. Usually derechos happen in Iowa, southern Wisconsin, southern Minnesota, Illinois, places like that. It's not that they don't have windstorms in the boundary waters. They do, and they refer to them more like wind shears that come down. They're straight line winds, and they'll fell trees for a period of anywhere from an eighth to a quarter of a mile, but not 250 miles. That's not a derecho. Derechos are much more longer, much more intense. Okay. This is a map by the Superior National Forest that they put out. They say here 67 to 100%. Actually, this was about 100%. One of the first people that flew over this damaged area right after the storm, he was a pilot by the name of Pat Lowe, a Forest Service pilot. He was headed over to this area to do a medevac of somebody that had been injured. He would do that throughout the day. He and pilot Wayne Erickson would be busy the entire afternoon medevacing people out. But he was one of the first over, and he got around here where the damage started, and right around in here, probably 10 miles to the east of where Pat Lowe first started seeing the blowdown damage, there is a cabin, a ranger cabin there called the Kekakabik cabin. Usually you cannot see it because it's surrounded by the trees. Well, Pat Lowe, when he got right here, he looked out and the trees were almost 100% flattened, just flattened. And he said, he radioed back and he said, you know, the Keck cabin, which again was about right here, 10 miles east, he could see the Keck cabin, and he said the Keck cabin looks like Little House on the Prairie. That's how badly the trees were flattened in that whole area. They didn't believe him, and it wasn't until much later when they started seeing some of the pictures and stuff. Now remember, this was 1999. If this would have happened today, social media would have blown up. Everybody would have had their cell phones out. They would have been taking videos and pictures and everything else, but in 1999, people didn't have that technology, and so a lot of people, it took 2-3 days before people realized what really happened. Go ahead. Now, in the book, I talk about all these people except for one of them, but there's Ranger Nicole Selmer, Pete Weckman, there's Camper Lisa Nass, Camper Vicki Brockman, there's the Price family cabin on the east end of Gunflint Lake. This is sort of the trajectory of the storm, but the storm was so big that it leveled a swath, as you saw from that previous slide. It leveled a swath that was 5 to 10 miles wide and about 25 miles long. And so everybody in this area was hit by the storm. And I talk about these people in here. Now, in the book. Now, I'm going to share with you, just to give you an idea of the intensity of the storm and the impact on people that were in the boundary waters that day, I'm going to share the story of camper Vicki Brockman and her 2 friends that were camping on Alpine Lake the day the storm came through. Now this, on the left, well, I should back up. On July 1st, 1999, 55-year-old Sue Ann Martinson is making her maiden voyage into the boundary waters. She's just met Jan Fiola and Vicki Brockman, who Jan's 40, Vicki's 35, at a party she went to about 3 weeks earlier. And they were talking about their upcoming trip to the boundary waters. This is a circuit that they had done before. It takes about 3 days. They had done it before, and they were talking about what they were going to bring. Turns out Jan was a real gourmet wilderness chef. And in 1999, there's a new phenomena in the wine industry. Boxed wine. And Vicki, Jan says, yeah, Vicki, you got to bring in a couple boxes of wine. Because it's very easy to portage in wine in the boundary waters rather than bottles that you have to transport back out. So they're talking about it, and they say, well, Sue Ann, what are you doing for the holidays? Now, remember, in 1999, The 4th of July fell on a Sunday. So the holiday was a Monday. So a lot of people were taking advantage of that 3-day weekend to go do something. Many of them go into the Boundary Waters, like these two. And Sue Ann Martinson said, you know, I'm 55 years old, and I was born and raised in Minnesota, and I have never been to the Boundary Waters. And they said, Sue Ann, you got to come with us. We have the canoe, we have the paddles, you can sit in the center, you don't even need to paddle. We have the food, we have boxed wine, what can go wrong? And Sue Ann thought, you know, this is my one opportunity. Go ahead, David. So, on July 1st, they go up to the end of the Gunflint Trail. This white line here is the Gunflint Trail. And they camp that first night, Thursday, at end of the trail campground there. And that picture was of Jan, that previous picture of Jan and Vicky was taken there. And Sue Ann, I don't have any pictures of Sue Ann because she was their photographer. She brought along one of those box cameras, if you remember those. She took all 25, 26 pictures that you had in those. Unfortunately, the quality of those was not good enough to reproduce in the book, but I do have all the pictures, but she didn't take any of herself. So they wake up on Friday, July 2nd, and they go to a nearby outfitter. They get their canoe, their paddle, you know, their paddles, their life vests, and they head out up this arm of Saginaw Lake. They head all the way around, and down in here in the southwest corner of Saginaw Lake, Sag is a really big body of water, and it can be really dangerous if the wind is up or the weather is bad. But on this particular day, the sky is filled with puffy white clouds. It's beautiful. I have some of her pictures, Sue Ann Martinson's pictures, and it's just really nice. And they've come down here and they find an island campsite, and they have hammocks, and they're voracious readers. They're all voracious readers. They hang up their hammocks. They read in the afternoon. There's a light breeze to keep the bugs at bay. Sure enough, Jan fixes a gourmet feast, and they wash it down with mugs of camp wine. Now, they had a very small tent, but all three of them could fit in the tent. I'll talk a little bit about that in a sec. All three of them settle down in the tent after dark, and as darkness settles in, Sue Ann Martinson, for the first time in her life, hears loons. And she thinks, wow, this is so beautiful. This is exactly what I've been missing. The next day they wake up and they do their first portage from Saginaw Lake into Red Rock Lake. Now, Jan and Vicky have been on this route before. They show her where they've camped before. They show her Red Rock Lake. It's called Red Rock because the rocks are really red. And they go from Red Rock into Alpine Lake. An Alpine Lake has several campsites, and there's one in particular that they've been at before that they want, and I'll tell you a little bit about it in a sec. Go ahead, David. Now, one of the things there was some text on that lower left. Did it? It didn't come through. Okay, that's okay. I'll talk to it. One of the things, this is a story about the weather, right? This, I didn't realize at the time, we have 122 National Weather Service stations across the U.S. The one responsible for predicting and forecasting and watching the weather in northwest Minnesota is in Fargo. And there was text there that talked about they issued, on July 4th at 7:05 in the morning, they issued their forecast for the day and of their entire region. No, no, you're missing some stuff on that one too. Can you go back, the other one? Yeah, there you go. Anyway, they issued their their forecast for that area and said, well, their winds could get a little gusty, there's a 30% chance of thunderstorm, nothing too untoward is going to happen. And then the most recent, before the 4th of July, the station that's responsible for the whole northeast section and Lake Superior, including the boundary waters, Ely, Hibbing, those places, Bemidji. Well, Bemidji's over here, but anyway, that comes out of the Duluth station, and their most recent, before the 4th, their most recent forecast came out July 3rd in the evening, and it said, well, there's a 20% chance of showers or thunderstorms. By the way, on July 4th, it rains about 5 to 7 inches. There's 20% chance of showers or thunderstorms, and it'll be really warm and humid, and you know, don't expect, the weather's not going to be anything too bad. It couldn't have been further from the truth. Go ahead, David. Now, another thing I learned about the National Weather Service is they have their headquarters in Norman, Oklahoma. And they're responsible for looking at the weather across the entire United States. And sure enough, on July 1st or 2nd, it didn't come through very well, but I don't know if you can see the borders there, but they see weather like this forming in northwest South Dakota and southeast Montana, probably on July 1st. And it's headed straight up towards the Minnesota-North Dakota border. But they don't think anything, they're not too worried about it because all the meteorological elements aren't aligned to make it some significant storm. In fact, by the time it hits, this area right here is Fargo, by the time it hits Fargo, they think it's going to dissipate, so they don't reach out to Grand Forks and they don't reach out to the Duluth station. But of course, those people have Doppler radar, and on the morning of July 4th, they start seeing this develop in Fargo, significant storm. That red is really intense weather and water falling, and the whole area there is on a Doppler radar is very significant, and it's headed straight for the boundary waters. Next one, Dave. Okay, back to our campers. All these dots on this map of Alpine Lake are campsites. That's why they're worried that they won't be able to find the campsite, their favorite campsite. They really like this campsite for a variety of reasons. One, it's across the main portage from Alpine into Seagull Lake. And their plan is they're going to spend Saturday evening there, July 3rd, wake up, spend all day the 4th there on Sunday, and then on the 5th, the holiday, they're going to portage out into Seagull and paddle back to Vicky's car and leave. That's the plan. And because this is on the edge of the boundary waters, almost all these campsites are taken, but sure enough, they score their campsite. They also like that campsite because it has a little beach in front of it, and back towards the back of the campsite, there's a wall of trees. In fact, they really like that place for their tent, so they go back and they pitch their tent about 6 inches from a 20-inch diameter jack pine. And they think, wow, this can keep us safe from the winds coming in from the west. And it's a really nice campsite that they score, and they feel fortunate, and they have a great July 3rd, spent it just like they did July 2nd. Feasted, had wine, listened to loons, fell asleep, and woke up then July 4th, early in the morning. Okay, go ahead, David. Now, this is missing some, we transferred this from PowerPoint slides to another thing, and so some of the stuff got lost. But anyway, this, what happens is about 7:49 in the morning on July 4th. You remember that map I showed you of the intense thunderstorm and the Doppler radar image that went through Fargo? Huge storm went through. It did millions of dollars worth of damage, closed down the airport, and headed straight for Bemidji. The Grand Forks station by 8:45 issues a whole new forecast for the area and says, Bemidji, take cover. Points east, take cover. There's a significant storm coming your way. Duluth, all the weather in the summer comes out of the west. They know this, so they're tracking the Doppler radar and they're tracking the forecasts coming out of Grand Forks. And Duluth says the storms could produce hail and damaging winds, take cover. Now that's great. That's really wonderful for anybody that's in the area. Now remember, this is 1999. The 4,000 to 10,000 people that are in the boundary waters, they don't have access to a radio. So the only thing they can do is look at the sky in the west and see something coming towards them, something significant. Go ahead. Oh, this is a GIF, and it shows you how the storm progressed. This is the boundary waters area. That's the border. It comes straight across. There, you can see in that area where it just gets really massive, that orangish glow really gets massive. That's where it does most of its damage. And it keeps heading out. He keeps heading east from there. I can't look at that too long, I get sick. Next slide. Back to our friends. July 4th opens up. I interviewed a lot of people about the weather that day, what it was like, and everybody said the same thing. It was hot, and it was still, and the lakes up there looked like polished steel. It was so still. And they did what everybody did, what most of us would do. They got on it in and out of the water. And remember, this campsite had a nice little beach in front of it, so they get in and out of the water in the morning. And about 11 o'clock, the wind starts picking up a little bit, and they look west over that wall of trees that they had pitched their tent next to in front of, and they see the clouds start building up. And sure enough, about 11:30, it starts raining. And it starts raining pretty heavy. And so they do what any of us would do. They seek refuge in their nylon tent. And they lay down, and the weather continues to intensify. And by 11:45, it is howling outside, and it is dropping buckets of rain. And about 11:55, Vicki Brockman gets up in the middle of the tent, and she looks through that little visor in the top of the tent. You know, a lot of those tents have those. Looks west, and she sees the air filled with flotsam and jetsam and flying over, and pretty soon the wind intensifies again, and the tops of the trees start flying off and flying through the air over the tent. And she turns to her friends and she says, get down, it's a hurricane out there. Now they are in a small 3-person tent. So Vicki Brockman is on the outside, and she gets on her side, and she kind of gets in a partial fetus position, and she covers her head with her arms. Sue Ann Martinson is in the middle, and she's facing the opposite direction. And she gets as flat as she possibly can on her back. And Jan Fiola is on the outside, and she lays on her stomach and gets as flat as she possibly can. At exactly noon, they hear the sickening sound of that 20-inch diameter jack pine fall, and it falls right on Vicki's pelvis. Now, I interviewed Sue Ann Martinson about this and said, well, did you hear anything? Yes, I swear I heard bones cracking, which is really amazing because the maelstrom was blowing around them. It pinned Vicki Brockman to the ground, and sure enough, leap ahead in terms of time. By the time she gets down to the Trauma 1 Center through a series of, I'll explain some of it, it's a long time to get out of her predicament. By the time she gets down to the Trauma 1 Center in Duluth, they are finally able to x-ray her pelvis, and they find it broken in 13 places. Now obviously, that person cannot be portaged. They cannot move. They're stuck there. Not only that, that tree had branches, and it pinned Sue Ann Martinson to the ground. Jan Fiola, who was on the outside, was able to wiggle free and went. They had seen some couples, 2 young couples in this area. This really wasn't that big of a, or right in here, this wasn't a big probably 100 yards distance from campsite to campsite. So they were able to, Jan was able to yell across to these guys and get 2 young guys to come over and help lift the tree off Vicki Brockman. And then it became fortuitous that all these people were in the boundary waters because this whole area around here was flattened. And so if it was me, the first thing I'd want to do is get out of there because it looked like bad weather was still coming. And so there's this exodus that comes, and it all comes down here right to the main portage. This is the portage everybody takes out of there. It's not the only one, but it's the main one. Of course, the blowdown has piled that and made it impossible. It's 10 feet high with fallen trees and everything else. So to get out, people have to paddle over here to this little spot here. Normally, this is a swampy river that people don't use as a portage. But now remember, on this day, it rained between 5 and 7 inches. So this little swampy area right here is a juggernaut. It's whitewater. And that's how everybody gets out. Moreover, anybody who goes by the campsite to try and take this, Jan, and they also, Sue Ann is ambulatory and she's out. Jan and Sue Ann tell them, we have an injured person here, they can't be portaged, please send help. And then they also tell them how to get out through this little swampy alpine river. And sure enough, by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, one of those people who's returning their canoe to the Voyager Canoe Outfitters at the end of the Gunflint Trail makes it out to Mike Prom, who's the proprietor of Voyager Canoe Outfitters at the time. The end of the Gunflint Trail, like the rest of the region, has been decimated. All the telephone poles are down. All the electricity is out. But Mike has a neighbor who has a shortwave radio, and he goes up to talk to his neighbor, and they get word out about Vicki Brockman and tell him where to find her. And the last flight of Pat Lowe's day, that day, Forest Service pilots can only fly from dawn to dusk. And the last flight of the day, he goes in and rescues Vicki Brockman and flies her back to the Forest Service dock in Ely and to the hospital there. Okay. Now, the reason I know that it happened at exactly noon is because Sue Ann and Jan are helped out by several people from the Wilderness Canoe Base, several wilderness guides that come and help them out, and help get Vicki into the beaver plain. And they have to paddle out in the dark, and they actually go through that little river I was telling you about, Alpine River. It's the only way out of it, and they do it in the dark. And I remember interviewing one of the Wilderness Canoe Base guides, who is now a pediatrician in the Twin Cities. And she said, you know, I'm a really careful person. I've never done anything stupid in my life, but that night, going down that white water in the dark was the dumbest thing I've ever done. But they make it out, they go to the Wilderness Canoe Base about midnight. You know, the beauty of getting to the Wilderness Canoe Base, Jan and Sue Ann haven't had anything to eat all day. They get to the Wilderness Canoe Base. Everybody, all the employees of the canoe base are hunkered down in a place called Pinehurst where they have their joint meals and stuff. And because the electricity has gone out, they're pulling everything out of the freezer and they're cooking all kinds of stuff. And so Sue Ann and Jan have blueberry pie and just all kinds of, they feast. But Sue Ann lays down about midnight and she finally looks at her watch and it is shattered at exactly 12 noon. That's when the tree fell on them. Go ahead. This is Vicki Brockman being put on a gurney, and these are some of the, I believe that's the pediatrician. These are some of the folks from the Wilderness Canoe Base, and then who flew in with Pat Lowe to help get Vicki into the plane. They take off in the plane, Go ahead. And they take Vicky and another person I talk about in the book, Lisa Noss. They take them to Ely, and Ely is a community hospital. And they don't have a lot of, they can't x-ray Vicky. Lisa Noss is hit on the head. I tell her story in the book. She almost dies. And coincidentally, the doctor there says, we can't do anything for you here. We have to get you down to the Trauma 1 Center in Duluth. They take them down to the Trauma 1 Center. Coincidentally, I interviewed Vicky and said, well, was there anybody in the ambulance with you? Well, there was this woman in there. She was in a world of hurt. She was in and out of consciousness. And then I interviewed Lisa Noss, and she said, yeah, I was in an ambulance. I went down there. There was somebody there, but I don't remember the details or anything else. Turns out they were both in that ambulance that night, being taken down from Ely to Duluth. They get down there, and of course, the first thing that happens is Lisa Noss gets taken into emergency, and they have to relieve pressure on her skull because she was hit in the head, and it's swelling dangerously, and so they drill some holes in her head to relieve the pressure, and she makes a full recovery. Vicki Brockman, this is where they x-ray her pelvis. Now, they find the 13 cracks in her pelvis. There's nothing you can really do with a broken pelvis. You can't put it in a cast or anything like that. The only thing they can do is keep her quiet for approximately 2 weeks while the body heals enough for her to be able to get around, and indeed that's what happens. And Vicki has a great sense of humor. I said, wow, you were there for 2 weeks? She said, yeah. And this is the newer hospital, but the old one had suites or rooms in it like this that overlooked the lake. And she said, you know, I was there for 2 weeks, but that is the best view of Lake Superior I've ever had. Okay. By the numbers didn't show up. Let's. I'll do them from memory. The windstorm of July 4th, 1999 felled 48 million trees in the Boundary Waters. It decimated an area of about 500,000 acres. At its peak, right after the storm, there were probably 250, 300 people, professionals working on the recovery, the rescue and recovery. Thank God nobody died. Lots of people were injured, and I talk about some of those in the book. They spent nearly $1 million in the recovery efforts. Okay. Oh, here are my 3 questions. Sudden death. This is the last part of the program, probably the most important part. One of the injured people chronicled in Gunflint Falling is referred to as Jane Doe. True? Show of hands. False? Yes, false. Hey, to be in it, you got to raise your hand. The July 4th, 99 Boundary Waters blowdown felled 48 million trees. True? Yes. Yes. Yeah. Good listeners. Derechos, straight line winds that travel more than 250 miles, are common in the Boundary Waters. True? False. You're all in the running to get it. So here's how I determine who wins the free book. It's the person sitting furthest away from me. I'd say that might be, I think it's you. Anybody have any, can we hear your story at all? Or?
It's not much of a story. It was more on Snowbank Lake, so right on the edge.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, it was really hard. All of the roads were blocked, and there was no communication. So.
Were you there with a group or?
It was at so it's one of the resorts on the way into. Like people would come from there to go in. So it wasn't like in a tent, thank goodness, but okay.
And nobody was hurt?
No, nobody was hurt.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
But you saw quite a bit of damage.
Right.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
That's what a lot of people said. Very scary. Any other questions?
I have one.
Yeah.
Oh, hi. My question, I was wondering, what made you decide to write this type of book about nature and true stories?
Well, I like writing about the outdoors. I like writing about dramatic events. You know, in the case of the Ham Lake fire, there was lots of heroism by normal, everyday people. And boy, I thought there was that in spades in Gunflint Falling. But the way I got into Gunflint Falling was in writing Gunflint Burning. And when I was interviewing people for that book, they said, you know, that fire burned so hot and intense because of the blowdown. That was from the July 4th, 99 blowdown. And then they commenced to tell me a story that was really dramatic about how they were caught and the thing, they couldn't get out and all that. So the more I heard about it, the more I thought it would be a good book. So it's actually sort of a prequel to Gunflint Burning. But that's how I got interested in it. Yes?
Was there any use of any of the logs, or you said they eventually became fuel for the burning, but was there any logging going on to try to make use of any of the logs, or the trees that were blown down?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and one of the first I asked the Forest Service people that I interviewed. In the boundary waters, no. And the reason was because it's a wilderness area. It would have, you know, they could have put in roads and that sort of thing, but apparently when trees are blown down like that, when they land on the ground, when they fall on the ground, it doesn't take very long before they become unharvestable or unusable as lumber. And so they told me it would take 6 months to put roads in enough to be able to harvest the woods, and they didn't. But in the areas around the Superior National Forest, around that were impacted, they had lots of lumbering timber harvests going on. And the harvests, the problem was that a lot of them were snapped off halfway up, and so it wasn't like a logger would go into a stand of trees and take them all down from the near the ground to the top. It was more happenstance, you know. Sometimes they'd get a full log, sometimes they get a half log, sometimes less. I mean, it wasn't really good. That said, there was a glut in the timber market after the blowdown, the year after the blowdown. Yes?
That portage that was filled up 10 feet high, were any of those things cleared? Or was it just, well, there's a portage that we don't have anymore?
No, they were pretty much all cleared, and in fact, the recovery afterwards, all the portages in the impacted area, that red area on the map that I showed you, all of those were impassable. And they had to go in the weeks and months afterwards and clear paths through that blowdown, and that's what they ended up doing. Some of the rangers I interviewed said, you know, we didn't realize it that day, but we would be working on the cleanup from this blowdown for the next 20 years. And that's what many of them did, and a lot of it was clearing sites, clearing portages, and doing that sort of thing. Yes?
I was wondering about the campers coming after that. Were they allowed in there?
No, they closed down the boundary waters right after that, and they, you know, the different sections that were the hardest hit. There were parts of the boundary waters, you know, the boundary waters is a big area. There's the Lake LaCroix district up in the northwest, and it wasn't hit at all. So it was still open. Parts south were still open, but most of it was closed, and it was closed through the rest of the summer. I don't think they opened it until September, some of it. So yeah, it did close down for a while.
Did the forest rangers have to clear all of the portages, or do they have other groups?
Yeah, well, a lot of the rangers were involved with it, but they subcontracted out and got all sorts of people working on it to go in there and clear it off. They brought in incident command crews from out west, hot shot, people that would normally work on a forest fire. It was a wet year, so forest fires weren't prominent like they are now. And so they would come in and clear out campsites, portages, all sorts of stuff like that.
I'm thankful that you mentioned that they asked for chainsaws, because when I was reading your story, I was worried they weren't gonna let chainsaws in, because no motors are allowed up there. So I'm glad you mentioned it, thank you, and otherwise it would have taken
Yes.
more than 10 years.
Yeah, oh yeah, it would, and normally in the boundary waters, you can only use primitive tools. So you
Right.
can only use a crosscut saw, and you can only use shovels to fix portages or to, put up wing dams and stuff. But yes, in 2 days after Jim Sanders, who was the forest supervisor at the time, who's the head of the Superior National Forest, which is responsible for the boundary waters, he issued an edict that allowed chainsaws in the boundary waters for the foreseeable future. They were only allowed for like 2 weeks or so after that, but they were a huge help.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm a camper, I used to do those little saws.
yeah.
How much damage happened in Bemidji during this time?
In Bemidji?
In the town of Bemidji?
Yeah, Bemidji was hit pretty hard. I don't think they were hit as hard as Fargo was hit, but they suffered wind damage. Ely suffered some wind damage, but not too bad. Nothing like, it kind of hopped, would go for a little while, and then it'd hop down and do damage, and then it'd go lift up for a little while and hop down and do damage until it hit the eastern end of the boundary waters. And then it just stayed on the ground and just flattened everything for quite a while.
I have a question, actually. I'm wondering how long your process was for interviewing everybody and getting all the information that you got in order to write the book. How long did that take?
It was kind of a slow process. I suppose if I was going to do it 4 to 5 hours a day, I can't write much more than that. That's a lot. It probably took 6 to 12 months, but in reality, it took like 3 or 4 years because I'd interview. Writing a nonfiction book is a lot tougher than writing a fiction book because nonfiction, you've got to interview people, you have to set up the interview, you have to find them, I transcribe our interview, record it and transcribe it, and then you write up the remarks and however you're going to use them, and you have to share it with them and make corrections. It's a process. So yeah, the whole process probably took 3 to 4 years, but I was working on, I always have lots of book projects going on, so.
I was curious about why there weren't pictures.
Yeah.
Was that the technology issue?
Well, yes, it was the technology issue. I wish the University of Minnesota Press could have included some of those pictures like I shared here. But when they took a look at the pictures I had, they said, these are just not, Gunflint Burning, which came out in 2000, it's about the 2007, the Ham Lake fire, and it came out in 2018. But as late as 2007, there were more pictures, high-quality pictures of the Ham Lake fire that they could use and that they did duplicate in Gunflint Burning. But when they looked at all my pictures, well, Sue Ann Martinson's pictures and others, I had some others, they were also, the quality wasn't there. And like I say, this is 1999, people didn't have iPhones and didn't have quality ways to take, most people didn't have ways to take quality pictures or videos. And that's why the U of M Press decided not to. They put in the maps, which I really appreciated.
I don't know if you know the answer to this one. You said the storm finally petered out on the East Coast.
Well, it went into the East Coast, it went down to Myrtle Beach, and it finally petered out in the Gulf of Mexico.
Okay, because I thought I saw part of it was in Maine.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, at that time, we were living in Maine, and I couldn't tell from your picture whether it was southern Maine or whether it hit further up the coast or...
I think it was southern Maine, and I think it was July 5th that it went through Maine. Do you remember that, July 5th?
No, I don't, because we lived in mid-coast Maine.
Oh, okay.
And it probably at the time there was something about it, but I don't remember anything about that.
Oh, well, I'm just judging, I didn't do any research on Maine's.
Well, I don't know why you would.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I will say, I think on the 5th, the morning of the 5th, it went through Maine, and those black X's on that map, that 6,000 mile, first part of it, that was only the first 1,000 miles of it. It showed a lot of damage by those black X's in Maine, but I didn't hear it. And I knew people in Canada died as a result of it.
Well, in southern Maine, there's not a lot of tree cover.
Oh, there's not?
No.
Oh.
There is some, but not like
Yeah.
mid-coast up.
Okay,
And there would be, the equivalent of the boundary waters would be the Allagash,
yeah,
and it never got that far.
yeah,
I don't believe, not from the pictures.
yeah. Yes.
I was wondering if you found a commonality in the people that you interviewed, whatever their relation may be to the event. Maybe they were rescuers, or maybe they were people in boundary waters. Did you find a common thread or a common response that these people shared?
The only thing I'd say, I did find this, I was really heartened about their willingness to help. I mean, if you're looking for heroism, look for an incident like this and watch the people. Everybody was significantly impacted, and their first response was altruism. Can I help you? Can I do anything? They all said that same thing, and I think that experiencing what they saw, and some of them were right in the middle of it. Pete Weckman, the game warden, or the forest ranger that I interviewed, was right in the center of it, and he went off and afterwards and helped all kinds of people, and you know, that is the one common thing. It was just the way people came up and helped, including our friends who helped Vicki Brockman, Sue Ann Martinson and Jan Fiola. I mean, they were great. I think that's probably about it. That's an hour, and thank you guys. Oh, I got one more last question.
I'd like to hear you comment on the last paragraph of the book about the future of the Superior National Forest. You remember?
Yes, was that the Professor Lee Frelick? Yeah, that section of the book. Yeah. Lee Frelick's a forestry professor. He thinks that global warming is going to transform the forest, and a lot of that is beginning to happen. I mean, the more deciduous trees in the forest, the nature of the forest is changing. More deciduous, less coniferous, but you know, it still could go either way if we're able to reduce I forget what his numbers were in there, but if we're able to reduce overall global warming by 1 or 2%, or keep it static, I think things will pretty much stay the same in the boundary waters. But it could be moving up. He predicts that if we don't, the forest up there could be more like an oak savanna in 100 years, rather than the pine forest that we have now. Hey, thank you very much for coming out today. I really appreciate it. Now, if anybody is interested in any books, I'll sign them back here.
Great. There's plenty of food back here. Please help yourself. I want to thank you so much for coming out. great talk, good information. There are books back here. The other thing, there are some books back here. You'll notice they're $5 a piece. They're previous books that have been the community book read over the last 12 years. The last thing is that you have an evaluation sheet here. Please fill it out. And if you have a suggestion for a book for next year, let us know. We'll look into it. Thank you very much for coming.